All right, Catherding. This is the humorous part of the program. No, just kidding. I'm going to introduce the panel, and just by way of opening the conversation, we're going to assume that everybody in the room understands the importance of collaboration and how more and more news organizations are needing and realizing that collaboration is the way to achieve large efforts, massive projects. And we're going to hear from these four tremendous panelists today about how they do it and what advice they have for all of us trying to continue the development of these collaborations for investigations. I'm going to introduce the panelists, starting with Marina Walker-Guevara, who is Executive Director at the Pulitzer Center, which supports enterprise journalism on underreported issues globally. She previously was the director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, where she was instrumental in developing their model of large-scale media collaboration, including two of the largest in the history of journalism, the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, which involved hundreds of journalists investigating leaked financial data. She was part of the team awarded the 2017 Pulitzer Prize in Explanatory Reporting. To her right is Ziva Branstetter, who is a senior editor at ProPublica, working with an investigative team. Previously, Ziva led the corporate accountability investigative team at the Washington Post and was the Post lead editor on the Pandora Papers investigation. She also worked previously, at Reveal and the Tulsa World, where she co-reported an investigation of Oklahoma's flawed death penalty system that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in local reporting. In 2015, she co-founded The Frontier, an independent investigative newsroom in Oklahoma. To Ziva's right is Meribah Knight, who is senior reporter and producer at Nashville Public Radio. She reports and hosts the Peabody Award-winning podcast, The Promise, an immersive series about inequality and the people trying to rise above it. She is currently a fellow in ProPublica's local reporting network. And to her right is Gerard Ryle, director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which led the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, the Vincent Files, and the Pandora Papers projects, all of them massive collaborations that involve hundreds of journalists across numerous countries. Their approach has persuaded more than 150 media companies to join forces to work together on these global stories, helping trigger the downfall of several world leaders and leading to multiple arrests and legislative reforms. He also shared in the 2017 Pulitzer Prize in Explanatory Reporting, among other awards. So with this breadth of experience, maybe we started the conversation by having each of you briefly talk about what is the collaboration you are currently working on, or one you recently wrapped up that you can tell us about. Marina?
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here with all of you. I wanted to reflect a little bit before I tell you what I'm working on, just to say how far we have come in investigative collaborations. It was really not very long ago that many of us had to plead and beg for editors to allow us to work with others. I remember one editor at a point after I pitched a global investigation just looking at me staring and saying that sounds so scary. and it was, and a lot of fears I think have been overcome thanks to good work, thanks to, we have been perfecting this methodology, which is not easy. It's herding cats, and sometimes, as a friend of mine says, sometimes it's herding bats and worse. And we can always do a little bit better. But I think during the pandemic, we have seen great investigative reporting, collaborative reporting come out. And that is because while others were trying to adapt and to find new ways of working, investigative reporters that are seasoned in this collaborative methodology were just continuing doing their work, working in distributed teams, using technology in smart ways, and understanding that by joining forces, we're actually able to have a much bigger impact and do stories that otherwise would be impossible. Some of them would literally be impossible to do without this model. Now back to my work today. After many years at ICIJ, I moved to the Pulitzer Center. And at the Pulitzer Center, what we are doing is using all these lessons that we have learned over the years and creating networks that are specialized on particular topics. So what we do is we think about issues or areas of inquiry that are critical, urgent stories of our time, and that are going to continue to be critical for years to come. And then we think about whether those are being misreported or underreported, and whether a collaborative cross-border methodology would make a dent, would really help advance reporting, understanding, and knowledge of those issues. So we have identified two in the past 2 years. Our first network that we launched is the Rainforest Investigations Network. This is climate change. This is the future of our planet. It's a hugely important, underreported story. It's also a business story, a corruption story, and a governance story. And at its core is a supply chain story. It's about how we are decimating these rainforests in 3 main regions of the world: Southeast Asia, the Congo Basin, and the Amazon, and the supply chains that are fueled by demand from consumers in the US, in Europe, and in China, for the phones we use, for the clothes we wear, as well as for the cars that we drive. So what we realized is that journalists were all dispersed. There was good work being done on this, in this area, but not able to always fully track those supply chains, and a lot of overlapping, unnecessary spending of resources on a story that could be done much better if there was a collaboration and a common strategy. So we identified the best investigative reporters in the Congo Basin, in Southeast Asia, and in the Amazon, and we partnered them with some of the best reporters in global media. For the regional reporters, when they were working in isolation, they were struggling to track all the way the supply chains to the Western world. For the global media reporters, they were struggling with doing this reporting in a thoughtful way and not parachuting in these regions. It's these hard to access parts of the world. So it was a really good match. The Pulitzer Center provided data support. We provide financial support for the regional reporters. And we also coordinate the collaboration, because collaborations need a lot of coaching, as we're going to discuss today. And just in the first 2 years, we have produced more than 100 stories in about 20 countries. There have been a lot of impact in regulatory and legal issues in Brazil, in Indonesia. There have been a strengthening of communities in Malaysia. The response that these communities are given to finding their voice and being able to assert their views, as well as just clearly connecting the devastation to some of the biggest brands around the world, including Tesla, Toyota, H&M, and so on. So that's the work that we're doing. It's a combination of visual investigations, data journalism, and traditional reporting, but it's fully collaborative at its core, and it's growing. And I won't tell you about the next one, but the next one is focused on AI accountability, and it's about connecting the dots between where the algorithms are made, Silicon Valley, Beijing, other parts of the world, and the impact that those algorithms are having on communities around the world. And that's also a cross-border story that requires this kind of collaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for having me here. My last project was the Pandora Papers at the Washington Post, and I was the main editor at the Post on that project. There were certainly many people who helped to make that a project a success on our end, and especially our incredible partners at ICIJ. I can't go into, I don't have time to go into all the details about how this massive thing operated even on our end, but suffice it to say, it's like being thrown into an ocean in a tiny boat and told, go find the 12 million fish. And they're out there, but you don't know which one's the biggest. You don't have a fish finder. You don't have a paddle or a motor. And so we started from that point. And of course, within a few weeks, the editors are like, great, what stories have you got ready? Or what story ideas do you have? Where are we going with this? And you quickly realize you need to learn a smarter way of fishing. One thing I can talk about throughout the panel is just translating cultures between a big news organization like the Post that does not have a tradition, frankly, did not at that time of doing a lot of collaboration, but really saw the promise of this partnership and building trust and translating between these two cultures, like what you can expect from us and what we can expect from you. At the end of this process, there were about 10 major print stories that the Post produced between my department of financial and the foreign department. There was a audio documentary that was significant length. There were 2 video docs. There was even an Instagram reel, which was fun for me to do, like boil this down in 1 minute, you know. And it's important, right, to be able to tell your story quickly and succinctly to all kinds of audiences. Motion graphics to explain the complex world of offshore finance and how money moves around in these shell formations. And then at the end of the project, there were 60 people involved or so, and lots of Zooms. So, you know, the challenge of it all mainly was you couldn't communicate in the normal form that you would. So email needed to be encrypted. Everything needed to be on Signal. You couldn't have anything in this CMS until like right before, you know, publication. And so that just makes all these tasks that are already difficult even harder. But incredibly proud to have been a part of the project, and ICIJ, they do amazing work and they sort of know how to make these collaborations work. And yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here and be talking about collaboration, because it's the way we're all going to leverage this shrinking pool of money that is out there to do great journalism. Just joining and working together, I think, is really how we're going to leverage the power of what we can all do so well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I'm the local reporter here, and have been really great to have partnered with a lot of national outlets that allow the local reporting to go up to a much higher level. My previous collaboration was with ProPublica and Ken Armstrong. We published a story on Tennessee and one county that had been illegally jailing and arresting thousands of children for decades. And that was a really exciting project, to work with the esteemed Ken Armstrong on that, a total, hero of many of us, but also to be able to answer a question that I had had since I moved to Tennessee. It was a story that evolved out of this mass arrest of 11 kids, and I really had always wanted to understand what that big moment in time meant, and it was a huge kind of a bit of smoke, and I thought surely there's fire there. And ProPublica was amazing enough to let me do that with them. And I can talk all about that collaboration from a local standpoint to a national standpoint, because I do feel really proud to be a local reporter. I think local reporting is really, really critical, and it is really in jeopardy. And I think the more that we can partner to lift up local reporting and good local reporting, then the better off we'll be. The collaboration I'm working on now, I can't say too much about, but it is a really exciting one with the New York Times and Serial and ProPublica, so even more cats to herd. But as an audio person, audio is a very collaborative medium. It is a medium that edits are done together. Edits are done in rounds. We are often looking to our colleagues as well as our editors for the same information. And often they are sparring in what we call, sweat lodge or edits, where we want the tape to hit the ear the right way. And another reporter or a colleague can be just as astute in listening to that and giving feedback as your editor. So it's a really collaborative medium, so I think that's probably why it comes a little easy to me to do collaborations. But yeah, so from an audio perspective, happy to talk about that unique kind of positioning and just the power of audio storytelling right now. I know there's some podcasters in the room, and it's a really exciting time in audio, but also a somewhat scary time for local journalism. And so the more that I can kind of lift that up, I think the better off we'll be.
Look, thank you for having us, and thanks for this topic, by the way, because I think it's fascinating. I think that, I'm going to argue this because, of course, ICIJ, we specialize entirely on collaboration. So I'm going to argue that this is actually the purest form of journalism right now, because it's all about story. And if you don't have a good story, you're not going to get anyone to collaborate with you. And I think the important element of a good collaboration is actually to have respect for everybody who works. Everybody comes to the table with something. It doesn't matter whether they're working for the Washington Post or one of the biggest newspapers in the world or somewhere small. You've got to have respect for everybody who works, and you've got to believe from the very beginning that everybody is going to contribute to that story. After we did Pandora Papers, actually, I'll just talk very briefly about another investigation we had kind of lined up and we had to postpone because of Pandora, and that was an investigation into a giant telecommunications company called Ericsson. You may not have heard of it, but it's actually, most of us here probably use their technology because they're one of the biggest providers of 5G technology in the world. And that's mainly because the US basically wanted to stop a company called Hawaii, which is a Chinese company, from doing it. So that's been a real boon for the Scandinavian companies, Nokia and Ericsson. But we were approached by a source who told us, in fact, that when Ericsson was brought into Iraq to repair the communication system there, they had actually been bribing ISIS and paying bribes to a terrorist organization, which seemed like an incredible story. So we rounded up what for us was a reasonably small investigation. I think we had 30 media partners in 22 countries and over 100 reporters working on the story for months. And everybody brought something to it. We thought this would be a really good story for the Swedes, needless to say, but the real stars of the show in the end were actually the Germans who came in. We needed to get into Iraq to report there, and of course because of COVID and many other things, we couldn't get our own reporter, and we actually tried to get Maggie from Egypt in there, and we couldn't get a visa for her. And it turned out that NDR in Germany had an Iraqi national working for them, so he was able to go into the country, and we got this amazing footage, which of course made the whole story for us. Not without some problems. In fact, he had COVID just before he got there, and we had a delay, and we were rushing to get comment from Ericsson, and we couldn't get him out of the country because he got COVID a second time while he was in there. But you know, there are always, I mean, I guess I bring that up because there are always going to be issues that you have to deal with it all the time. You've got to be very flexible to do these kind of things. But in the end, we did manage to publish the story. When we put our questions to Ericsson, they took the unusual route of actually making public our questions to try and get ahead of the story. And it backfired for them. Their share price dropped 20% in a day. And then we managed to publish the story. Again, another lesson I've learned is that no matter what happens, don't rush your reporting, because if you make a mistake, or if any of your media partners make a mistake, it'll bring the entire project down. So we waited until we were ready to publish. We published. The share price fell another 8%. I think by the end it was down 30%, or $15 billion off the company. The company is now being investigated by US authorities again. They had been fined before for paying bribes. They had actually been withholding this information from the US authorities. So they're in real trouble now. And of course, they're under investigation in other countries as well, including Sweden. So, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about what makes for a good collaboration and what are sort of the good rules of the road to set at the start of it.
Well, as Gerard said, is a great story at the core of it. That's the main thing, right? That's what all journalists want. That's what brings us together, what makes us want to go through the sometimes the hurdles of a collaboration. But I would like to focus on something even before we start collaborating, which is how we pick our partners. And that is just such an important moment of the collaboration, and it's 50%, I would say, of the success. So even when I started doing collaborations like 20 years ago, I hadn't appreciated the importance of looking at the totality of the person, not just the journalistic record. Of course, we need to look at, like, has this person done excellent work? Does it have the expertise that we need? Or does it bring any other technical or other skills that are going to complement the team? But also, is this person made for collaboration? Does this person have the emotional intelligence, the cross-cultural sensitivity, the ability to listen to others and to communicate well that is going to make for a good team member? It just takes, like they say, one person, one bad apple to poison an entire collaboration. And you know what? Life is short. No brilliant jerks. And we just don't have a mental space with a pandemic and a raging war and a distributed team. We just can't put up with brilliant jerks. And so it's really important to spot them beforehand and to know, and there are sometimes lone wolves that acknowledge that they are lone wolves. I have had reporters, notably like in France, one time when this wonderful reporter said, you know what, and he's one of the best investigative reporters in France, and he said, I love ICIJ, I love these collaborations. He did one with us, but in the future, just leave me alone. I just like being who I am, and I respect that. So let's examine who we want to be. Are we the lone wolf? Are we the collaborator? And when we have the responsibility to bring together this team, we have to take that responsibility very seriously for the sake of the story. The other thing that I would say for the success of a collaboration is clear guidelines from the beginning. So no legal jargon. I make still a lot of efforts to try to get all lawyers out of my agreements and community guidelines that we set forth for the collaborations. These have to be put together by the journalists. We know what we need to agree on. We know what is important. It's the confidentiality of the story and the data. It's how we're going to credit one another. It's the expectations for the sharing. When we say radical sharing, it might be different in different collaborations. Do we mean sharing drafts? Do we mean sharing reporting? Do we mean writing together? That is very hard. I don't, advise you to do a lot of that. But how do we come up with a few clear guidelines that are going to, basically set forth the path? And I would say that in recent years, it used to be that collaborations were a nightmare, that people had PTSD after them. And I think that we have come again a long way to make these really moments of real excitement, where a mission-driven global team, regional team, or local team is leaving aside all egos, political newsroom considerations, and so forth, and is just united by that one aim that is the story.
I just add to those excellent points. I think it's just really important to remember you shouldn't collaborate just for the sake of it, just because everyone's doing it, just because it'll be bigger, just because someone has a bigger platform. It's not twice as hard. It's like 3 or 4 times as hard. And every partner you add, there's a multiple effect. And so there really needs to be a good reason. And there's 2 ways I think successful collaborations can happen. One is organically, reporter to reporter. That tends to work pretty well, right? You have 2 talented people who are excited about something. They want to work together. They go and sell it to the bosses, and then everyone's bought in. That's one method, and those often work quite well. And the other one is where 2 organizations like ICIJ and the Post and all of hundreds of journalists around the world decide, okay, we've got this big trove. We're going to work together. And obviously, you need a lot of partners on a project like that to really dig into and find all the secrets that are buried there. But I think you need to think about what the needs are of each partner, and those may not be the same. So, an example from my past, I founded a startup there with my reporting partner, Carrie Aspinwall, is in the room, and we 4-person organization, and we had a death penalty expertise. That was very valuable to people at the Marshall Project. They needed somebody in Oklahoma to report on all the various execution things that were going on. So our reporting expertise plus their obviously wide criminal justice expertise and their editorial expertise, their oversight, the help that they gave us in telling those stories, both of us had those needs met. So I just say think carefully about what each party brings to the table and make sure that it's a multiplying effect. You're not just going to be like competing against each other. You're really adding something.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. That's what I was going to kind of riff off of, so thanks for handing it over. But what I've done is really merged organizations, and I think what I found is that when you bring 2 newsrooms together, there's kind of a reconstitution that has to happen of the entire team. There's going to be 2 editors, there's going to be 2 reporters, there's going to be 2 of everything or more. And you have to figure out, like, what does this new team look like, and what everyone's role is going to be in the team. And a lot of times, the pitfall is everybody kind of holding on to what their role was before the team formed, and not giving in to kind of like, how can I lend my expertise to the team so that we can all row in the same direction and share responsibilities. So in the case of ProPublica, it was, how do we figure out who can be like the editor, who the other editor can be a project manager, like that's what they're good at. And like, for me, I was on the ground, I did all the interviews. Ken was in Seattle, so he was sorting through all the records. Now in Tennessee, they have this terrible law that you have to be a resident to request any records, so I was also requesting the records, but everybody kind of found their niche, and they found where their skill sets lied within the team, and I think that's really, really important, because it took us a little while to get there, and there were some hiccups along the way, and I think what I've learned over time is that you really just have to surrender to the team and figure out, like, how do we reconstitute as a team that works together for this specific project. And when that goes away, everybody can kind of go back to their normal day-to-day roles, but that you really have to think about, how does this team fit together? And each person has a different piece of that. And then also merging styles and work cultures and workflow processes. In radio, we have a much more collaborative editing process, which is kind of these rounds of edits. At ProPublica or the print places I've worked at, it's much more kind of top-down and hierarchical. And so how do you actually merge those two styles of editing? And it's not easy, but we did end up doing it. I mean, we ended up doing a lot more conversational edits than just kind of dropping notes into a Google Doc or writing one big long edit letter. It was easier for us to just all get together in some virtual format and say, hey, let's talk through all the edits together. And so those two things, figuring out kind of like, what does your new team look like, and what is everyone's individual role going to be that's going to fit that team and make that team set up for success, and then also kind of how do you have a real honest conversation before you get to the edits about how you do edits, and figure out a way that's going to work for everybody.
Yeah, look, I think I can build a little bit on that too, because I think, to make your point, if you're working with multiple different types of media, like print, online, radio, TV, they all have completely different needs, and you need to take that in consideration from the very beginning. I mean, if a TV reporter can't get somebody to talk to the story on camera, that's a real problem. But if you're a print reporter, you can get around a lot of that with the documents alone. So you need to think about that. I think if you're, I mean, again, from an ICIJ point of view, when you're working across multiple countries and multimedia, you've got to have strategy from day one. You've got to lay the ground rules. Somebody's got to be in charge. And in our case, it's always ICIJ. But that doesn't mean we're telling any individual reporter what to do. All of the reporters are working to their newsrooms, but the overall project has to be led by somebody. And otherwise, it is chaos. And I can give you examples of that, and I'm sure everybody else here can. You have to have strategy from day one. The other point I would make is that you've got to have the tools. So if you're not just working with, say, 2 reporters in a newsroom, but you're working across 100 countries, you have to have tools to allow the reporters to collaborate. And so you need to use technology in a really clever way. And that technology cannot break down. So we use an online newsroom where the reporters can go into our online newsroom every day from their laptops or anywhere in the world, and they can communicate with everybody else in the collaboration. It's got to be working every day. They've got to be able to post notes on their findings if it's a document-based inquiry. And on that point, if you're working with huge document set, like say Pandora Papers, where we had 12 million documents from 14 different service providers, you've got to allow the reporters to look at every document again in a really fast, efficient way. So you've got to be able to, allow them to use machine learning and other things. But again, if you're the central organizing entity like ICIJ was, our technology has got to be the best, and it can't break down. You can't sort of scrimp and save on servers and things like that. You've got to let everyone do. And the other point I'll make is that, everyone's got different personalities, and you have to walk into a collaboration knowing that some people are really good at writing, others are really good at editing, but some people are a pain and some people aren't. And you've got to allow a little bit of also to allow for cultural differences. and you got to lean into that and actually make the most of it, because a lot of that is where the advantage is. Like almost everybody in the room, if everyone here was in a collaboration, everybody is going to bring something to the table in terms of that, just another way of looking at something. I learned this early on by making mistakes. I looked at documents and I looked at it in a very I guess in a very Western way, and then you would work with reporters from other countries who were seeing it in totally different context. And I think that the best kind of journalism has got the most context in the reporting, and again, collaboration allows enormous context, therefore better reporting.
Very important point. Let me expand on a little that you mentioned, Gerard. So when you have newsrooms going from massive global news organizations to very local, sometimes small nonprofit newsrooms, or just freelancers that are the one person in some country reporting, how do you manage the power dynamics of those relationships? How do you make sure that the big conglomerates of media don't just simply trample down the smaller local organizations?
In other words, how do you stop the big guys bullying the smaller guys, essentially?
Yeah.
Again, you've got to set the rules from the very beginning. It's something that we do come across, and you've got to rein it in from day one. If you see it happening and you know what's going on, you've got to stop it, and you've got to make sure that everyone, again, to that point I was saying before, you've got to introduce a rule of respect, and eventually they do learn.
Have you ever had to kick someone from a collaboration?
We've never kicked anybody out, but there are a lot of people we would never work with again, as Marina mentioned.
One of my goals with Pandora was to make sure we got asked back to the dance. No matter where I was, that you want to be good partners, because this is a small world, and you do that anyway because it's the right thing to do, and the work is better. But it's just like in real life, right? You treat people as you want to be treated, and the rest takes care of itself.
Ziva, let me follow up on a little bit something you mentioned earlier about keeping people abreast. How do you manage? So the Post was one of dozens of organizations, hundreds of reporters involved in the project. Mm-hmm. So, and people, we're talking about people in the U.S. time zones all the way to the other side of the world. How do you make sure that folks know what's going on?
I mean, it was very difficult during COVID, and just honestly, this sounds so boring, but lots and lots of Zooms, and predictable Zooms. Like we set them up so that as we onboarded different teams at the Post, the visual team, the audio team, the audience team, they all had post ICIJ meeting times. So the visual teams at the Post knew when the visual meeting was with ICIJ. We invited them into our meetings. Like, you got to open up. Like, there's no, I have a saying, you can't be halfway pregnant. So, like, you need to, if you're going to trust people, you need to trust them. That means they hear all your meetings where people, I don't know, say things maybe they wouldn't say normally with an outside organization in the room. But to get back to the point, I had daily office hours. So everyone had a Zoom link. I knew I would be there online. Okay. And I would be there to answer any question, no matter how short. And a lot of times people just need 5 minutes. Like, where does this stand? Okay, I'm good. So just a very structured, predictable process. One document that has links to all the other planning documents. I mean, this sounds, kind of like obvious, but just having a clear structure where everyone has access to the information widely, sharing often, reminding often, having sort of a lot of bullet points and to-dos, and so that everyone knows sort of, here's what is done, here's what's being done, here's what's not done yet, but I'm getting to it. That kind of just really clear structure, I think, is important. And then again, opening up your process, your meetings to your partners.
I wanted to follow up quickly on the power dynamics. Power dynamics exist in newsrooms, and they exist in collaborations. And one role that helps a lot with that is a collaboration coach or the project manager. Most investigative reporters, we want to go down the rabbit holes. We don't want to manage anybody, and we don't know how to. We're not very good at. So I really celebrate when we find these great investigative reporters who are also willing to play that role, or when newsrooms are advertising for positions that are specifically to manage the collaborations, because a lot of failed collaborations They have failed because there wasn't a person who was taking that responsibility and that role of being in the trees and in the forest, but also looking after maybe the more vulnerable members of the collaboration. And those vulnerabilities can be linguistic. So are we asking ourselves in a global collaboration, who is being set behind because of language barriers, who's being set behind because of technical barriers? That is our responsibility to address that. Otherwise, the idea that this is that collaborations are equalizers and making a more perfect union is not true. So in global collaborations, we have regional editors with language abilities that can help translate culture, that can help translate also journalistic practices, because, for example, in some areas of the world, going for comment might not be something that journalists do all the time. But it is important. It is something that as a team, as a global team, we want to preserve. It's part of the fairness of our reporting. So how do we translate that principle in a way that is thoughtful? On the other hand, Western reporters go for comment 6 weeks in advance in these big global collaborations. And in a place like Russia, like we learned from our colleagues there, they were like, wait a minute, are you telling me that I am going to go to the Kremlin and tell them that we have all these documents related to Putin's assets, and I'm going to be sitting there for 6 weeks waiting for them to come kill me? So that's what wasn't going to happen. So that was, they were translating to us saying, you need to adapt and adjust to this reality. And so we came up with a different way of addressing it, where like the Western reporters went to the Kremlin 6 weeks in advance to satisfy our need for fair reporting. We were safer, and we protected the Russian reporters, who then went 3 days before publication, which was their tolerable, period of time for asking those questions. So all of these things come up all the time. It's important to be able to think in advance and to not be so caught up in the moment, because that's when mistakes can happen, or we can put people at risk, or we can leave people behind and create cliques in a collaboration where a few powerful English-speaking media organizations get to make a lot of decisions or have more advantage.
Meribah, from the point of view of local news organizations, and we have reporters in the room who work for local news organizations, what will be your advice to them looking to, say, gain a collaboration that brings expertise or national exposure to a local issue? How do you manage that relationship, that power dynamic between when you're trying to work with a national partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to just have confidence in your work, and you have to remember that you are the person who's a member of that community, and you know the community, and you're on the ground, and you know the culture of the place. I mean, I think local reporters all over, ever since, Trump was elected, it was like, oh, wow, maybe we need to have eyes and ears and hands on the ground, boots on the ground, so that we actually know what's happening. Because there were a lot of assumptions made, and I think a lot of local reporters could have, helped other organizations understand the place in which, they're trying to cover. So I think for me, I try to keep my confidence level up and try to be respectful of, the opportunity and the outlet that I'm partnering with, but to let them know that I'm the expert. I'm the expert at this. I live here. I drive through this place all the time. I've knocked on hundreds of doors. That this is my beat. But I think there are times that obviously you have to be open to learning from those collaborations, and I think that's been one of the most enriching things about being in local news and collaborating with really, really spectacular organizations like ProPublica, like Serial. It's, you learn so much about how they do this phenomenal work, and you are able to bring that back to your newsroom. I do think it is really important in every collaboration to have a tiebreaker. You need to have it, like you were saying, Gerard, you need to have somebody who's going to say, no, we're going with this. I think, the way it's structured in the local reporting network is that ProPublica is the expert. I mean, this is what they do all the time. They are a fabulous investigative journalism entity. In the relationship with Serial, they will have tiebreaker because they know audio. So everybody at one point or another, I think, has this moment where they have to say, yeah, you are the expert. And we're going to work together, but ultimately there is somebody here that knows what we're doing just a little bit better, and have that trust and have that ability to say, like, we know that we're going to make it great together. But yeah, there's always someone that has just a smidgen of advantage depending on what the partnership is and what you're doing. So I feel like as a local newsroom, it's easy to feel like you might be small potatoes, but at the same time, I think I've always had the attitude of, like, the work that I do is at the highest level possible, and I want to make it that every single time, whether I'm partnering or not. And I think when you do that time and time again, like, people just start to notice, and you can kind of reach out and bring people in who you might never expect to say, we want to work with you.
Thank you. I want to ask you one more question before we open to questions from the audience. When you get to the latest stages, you know, you have a deadline that has been agreed upon. We are in the production, writing stories, producing the audio. What are special considerations to have in that stage, briefly? And also, what do you do once the story breaks and is published? Is there anything you do after?
Somebody else can.
Look, I can take a stab at that. I mean, I think it's important at this point, if you're getting to the end, is that no one has been left behind, because again, you know, you're crossing. I mean, the thing about collaborations is that it actually turns everything you've learned as a reporter upside down. First of all, you got to share, which is not something that as investigative reporters we like to do. I spent 20 years not sharing anything, even with my editors, because I knew, as editors do, as soon as they hear a story, they'll say, why haven't you got it? Where is it? You know, and so you learn to keep secrets. So the first thing, get that out of the way. If you want to do a proper collaboration, you've got to share. If you find an amazing set of documents, you've got to believe that by sharing, you're going to get a much better story than if you were to do it on your own. We'll just take, like, Panama Papers as an example. 2 German journalists got that. If they'd done a story, I mean, with all due respect to the journalists, there were hardly any German stories in there. It wouldn't have been a phenomenon. You know, by sharing, we were able to bring down the 3 world leaders with that story. And they got much more glory from that than they would have got if they just held those documents to themselves. So again, I would say leave no one behind. One technique we use a lot is we actually produce a regular newsletter for everybody, which is a catch-up. So it's kind of a cheat sheet. So if you haven't been paying attention for months and months at a time, you can actually just read the newsletters and catch up there.
Just to clarify, this is a newsletter not for the public, just for the participants.
It's just for, it's an internal, it's kind of like, you sometimes see that the best of news this week, or these are things you should have read. It is a bit like, oh, Marina found this week, and, you know, an exciting kind of thing. We also use technology in a different way too. So if you're interested in the various, say we're doing a Pandora paper story and you come across something in there like, say, Russian oligarchs that you're particularly interested in, we use our technology, you can actually click on that as a topic that you're particularly interested in. So everybody who's working on the collaboration, every time they find something about an oligarch, it automatically gets emailed to you. So, and it's amazing because, again, it gets over one of these problems you have as a reporter. How do you keep the enthusiasm up? And so every morning you're waking up with 20 new leads, and it really gets your heart racing, and then you want to contribute something to everybody else. So it keeps it kind of going.
Thank you.
I think keeping the morale up is also a lot of trying to, and hard in pandemic times, but pre-pandemic, we always strive to get everyone together at least once, and in this global collaboration, sometimes it was 100, 200 reporters coming together. I remember one time that for Panama Papers, they even wanted it to be secret for the newspaper that was hosting us, so somehow we were like secretly 200 people meeting at Süddeutsche Zeitung. I don't know how that worked. But those moments of coming together and in smaller collaborations might be much more feasible. And during the pandemic, it would have to be virtually, are incredibly important, not only to work on the story, but also to work on the bond. Because again, this is all about trust, about getting to know one another as people. Because it's only at that point that then we're going to be able to lower those barriers that are so ingrained in investigative reporters. This is our DNA is not sharing. Let's remember that this is a huge shift in the way that we operate. it's a paradigm change in investigative journalism. And I would say, in my view, it's the most important and dramatic and transformative one in the past 100 years, basically, along with technology and what our technology is allowing us to do. But we have to remember that it's all about those bonds. And how do we cultivate the bonds? So we can't think, oh, when I get the leak or when I find this great story, that's when I'm going to start collaborating. The great collaborations have happened because they were built little by little along the way with the stories that maybe didn't bring down three governments, but that helped create the trust, helped perfect the technology, help us, make some mistakes in the methodology, and get us to a better place. So when the big story strikes, we're ready to tackle it. And I would say one of the stories that happened recently, and this is no criticism to anybody, but I think we also need to talk about when, things are maybe lacking, it was the Facebook files. The Facebook files was a hugely global story, and it was a story that was not tackled in a global way. It was tackled only by a few Western organizations. And it was a story that the major consequences of what was being revealed were happening in the global South. And that's what the whistleblower said. But that's not the way that the story was tackled. So we are still that shows you that we still have a ways to go.
Just very quickly, because I want to leave time for questions. I would just say, we're headed toward production, be very, very clear about workflow. Get back out schedule, publication date, and then work backwards. You're going to have 2 copy desks. You're going to have several rounds of editors. You're going to have legal review. One organization might have a fact-checking separate process. So you want a workflow that is like literally written down with dates. And then after publication, do a post-mortem, look and see what worked, what didn't work, and apply those lessons to future collaborations.
All right.
I don't have anything.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Questions? Okay, up, yeah, right there, and then on the other end of that, and then at the back of the room.
I know, didn't we? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, go.
Oh, okay. Hi, thanks for coming. I really appreciate everything you've said. So I've been in newsrooms where, while I'm very excited about collaborating, the higher-ups are less excited about that. And so what strategies can I employ to help convince them that collaboration is something beneficial and helpful, aside from just pointing to all the great work that y'all produce?
I've had to do this before, so I'll start answering that. I mean, from a reporting standpoint, I always try to basically, I write a lot of memos, and I try to fight for the vision of the story in those memos and, really report out why a partnership would be beneficial, and not just something for me to do. I think in newsrooms right now, we're thinking a lot about equity. We're thinking a lot about opportunities for a variety of reporters. And sometimes it can seem like one reporter is getting all the opportunities. And so you do kind of have to say, here's why this is going to be a worthwhile collaboration for us. Here's stats about, the reach that this place will have, the resources that they will bring that we don't have, the processes that we can learn from them, and then what we can bring to them and how it can be a mutual beneficial relationship and partnership. But I do think it's more than just to saddle up to your editor and be like, hey, I got this idea to do this partnership. Like, you actually kind of have to be organized and thoughtful and write out kind of a project plan or a pitch. Like you would pitch an editor on a story, you pitch them on the partnership and why you're the person to do the partnership and why the partnership will be beneficial to them. I've learned this from my brother who works more in corporate sphere, but why are they going to get value out of this partnership?
Yeah. And also never underestimate the fear of missing out that a lot of editors have, FOMO. So if you know that other partners are in the collaboration and that those partners matter to your boss, to your editor, or that he or she compared to them, you can just say, well, so-and-so, it's a pity because so-and-so, it's already in, they have already invested a month reporting, we're actually behind. So I would say that, and also, just stress or emphasize the visibility that collaborations can bring to a local organization. For example, and that can translate into traffic, that can translate into even memberships or subscriptions. I remember being surprised that Le Monde, the newspaper, when they pitch their new subscribers, and when they try to get new subscribers, among the advantages of buying Le Monde, one clear one that they, and I've seen this, is we are part of global collaborations like the Panama Papers and this and that. So if you want to see those, you might want to subscribe to us. So this is starting to matter also on the business level.
Right. Second was there. And then if we can get a microphone back in the room so that we can move quickly to the next question. Yeah, go.
Hi, I'm Gergana from UC Berkeley. I wanted to ask something that Marina briefly touched upon about the international, like cross-border projects. And I guess exactly because these developing countries, the reporting standards are very different there. And sometimes it's not a simple FOIA request that gives you the documents that you need. So how do you deal with the transparency issues of just good reporting that will be recognized here or in the UK or somewhere? How do you bring the whole reporting to the standards that will suffice?
I think that, just very briefly, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues here, but when they are run correctly, collaborations are also learning communities. So we are not only doing the story, but we are all learning together. It's knowledge sharing at all times. When we're doing now these rainforest investigations, we are building in training and capacity building as we go. And that is for everyone. It's for the Globe, for the New York Times and El País and The Intercept, who are part of this work, but it's also for all the regional reporters. And sometimes the regional reporters are the ones that are leading the capacity building because they happen to have expertise and knowledge that their global counterparts need. Sometimes it's the other way around. So I think that, just emphasizing that aspect is one way to go.
Yeah, I also think you have to be very clear about whether you're doing a co-reported, co-edited story like we did with about half of the post-Pandora paper stories, or whether all partners are going to take the same core documents, the same core information, and go off and do their own stories that don't then cross-publish, right? All I know is that whatever ran on the Washington Post, like we were editorially responsible for those facts and for fact-checking that information, for making sure it passed our editorial standards. So, and ICIJ, so you just sort of, you develop the model that your newsroom and your newsroom leadership feels the most comfortable with in terms of taking responsibility for the material and any factual issues that might come up. And, I think it's good to sort of move on that path in whatever way you feel best fits your organization's, level of editorial standards. And at the end of the day, everyone's got to be responsible for what publishes on their sites. And so I think if you all sort of, like she said, join in together in how can we help you? How can our resources at the Post help you, develop your journalism, and how can you help your expertise about your community can enrich the story for us? So I think you have to bring the best that both organizations have to the process.
Any other questions? After that, okay, over here.
Hi there. I'm wondering, some of you mentioned this in passing, but I'm wondering on a very practical level, if you could break down what tools you use and what platforms to interact with other people on your team so that you're communicating in secure ways while still able to actually communicate. I imagine that's challenging to be able to share things to the extent you need to share them without putting anyone at risk.
Sure, I can have a stab at this and then I'll pass it over, because there are lots of free tools out there these days. As you know, like Signal is something that we use all the time around the world. You need to use WhatsApp in certain countries. Certain African countries, they don't have Signal, or the internet itself isn't strong enough to carry it. We actually build our own tools at ICIJ, and it's something that we've been very thoughtful about from day one. So we have our own online newsroom, as I mentioned earlier. You basically train the reporters into getting in there. We have deliberately set it up as a kind of Model T Ford. Anyone can get in, even if you're going to go to internet for 2 hours a day, you can get into it. And so we use that as our main communication channel. But because we're also a non-profit, we're able to, if there's a fantastic tool out there in Silicon Valley, we have not been shy to approach companies and get the software for free, and we've done that multiple times.
We use Signal a lot. We had, about 50 different Signal channels going on at the end, and then Dropbox and encrypted iron key flash drives. So you had to be very careful not to have stuff on your laptop and travel around with it, and don't email things back and forth in unencrypted format. But Signal, Dropbox, encrypted flash drives.
Signal, we use it only for brief communication and updates or like news sharing or things like that, but for like really in-depth findings sharing, which is the meat of the collaboration, we use a platform called Confluence, which is open source, and it allows you to bring to build all kinds of like project pages, have like threaded communications, do like really good searches, upload documents. So that's something that anybody can use. And then for like if we have a leak or a big amount of documents where we want to do more advanced intelligence on those documents, we are using a platform called Aleph, which is developed by the OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Reporting, what is it?
Yeah.
Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project.
Yeah.
So we basically took their code, they make it available, and we recreate it. So instead of building a new platform, we are recreating with that open source code for our purposes.
Can I just make one, other point there, and a really practical one? When we started doing this, we basically made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes you don't need to be secure. I mean, a lot of the communication doesn't need to be secure. So we were spending ages, encrypting everything, and then someone would forget the passcode, and then we lost things. And so for most of reporting, you don't need any more than say Google Docs. I mean, you got to be practical about this.
Yeah.
You can't spend all of your time trying to be totally secure and then you actually fail to collaborate. It's got to be easy communication. So whatever you do, make sure it's easy.
We got time for one more question.
Yeah, thank you. Philip Martin, GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting, Boston. First of all, props to the panel, this excellent panel, much appreciated. I want to ask you about the chicken and the egg of collaborative reporting. What comes first in terms of conceptualization? You have an idea, who approaches who first, a local and then the national entity, if you will, or obviously both could occur, but is there a general process in terms of the chicken and the egg? Which one comes first, in broadly speaking?
In my experience, it's been a little bit of everything. So I brought the story to ProPublica that I did with Ken Armstrong, and it was a very much kind of reporters getting together. Ken was like, "This is awesome. Do you need help?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure." You're like this, you're like dynamite to this thing. And then with the Serial New York Times, it was that they approached me and I approached ProPublica. Then we started to talk. And so it can be all different directions. But the challenge with the three kind of party is to make sure that everybody feels like really valued and like someone didn't go behind anybody's back. It was just kind of like there was a line of communication already open, and then this was and then you want to bring people in pretty quickly so that everybody can kind of talk about it as soon as possible.
Can I add my own little answer to that? An experience we have with the MOLD project. We were about 6 to 8 months into it when we discovered 2 other news organizations were about 6 to 8 months into the same investigation, 2 different parts of the country. And fortunately, we and them immediately realized, why compete on this? Why try to beat each other? Let's collaborate. It'll be a bigger story. Voila. So don't let your first instinct to be, we have to be exclusive on this. You reach a bigger audience when you have more people disseminating the story, and your audience gets value from that. So,
And I would
Thank-
only add that, if you're a reporter with a great story, you want to share it with others, try to find other reporters, get them excited. Don't start, going to the bosses and they're gonna ruin it. just try to deal it at the reporter level first in an organic way, like Shiva had said. And then when they are excited, they can get their bosses excited. And continue from there. It's very different if a boss comes to you and tells you, you have to collaborate on this.
Right.
So let it be organic.
Thank you very much.